The walls of Jericho didn't just rise as a defense against invading armies. They rose as a monument of pride, a thick barrier of rebellion, lust, and false gods. Behind them, the Canaanite city was alive with noise, trade, and rituals that would chill the soul of any godly man. At night, incense smoke danced with screams of ecstasy and agony. Drums echoed from high places where human blood was spilled in honor of Baal and Ashtoreth. And nestled within that spiritual darkness, in a home built right into the city's towering wall, lived a woman known by name, but not by heart, Rahab. To the men who visited her, she was merely a transaction, a soft-voiced seductress with eyes that never judged. Her house was a crossroad for travelers, merchants, and spies, a place where rumors traded faster than silver, and secrets were whispered in the dark. She was many things to many men, but unknown to all, she was more than what she sold. Rahab was a prostitute, yes, but not because she enjoyed the life. She was born into it. Her mother, too, had lived within the red quarters of Jericho, and her grandmother before that. Generational chains wrapped around her name like invisible ropes. To escape it was to abandon all she knew, but to stay was to slowly lose what little remained of her soul. The city called her a harlot, but God had already begun calling her chosen. By day, Rahab observed the movements of Jericho's nobles and priests. She watched their rituals, their sacrifices, even children laid on burning altars. She heard the chants and the moans, and she wondered, is this truly the God's delight? And though her body was used by many, her mind remained sharp, her ears open. She gathered more intelligence in a day than Jericho's guards did in a week. She knew of trade routes, the wine shipments from Moab, and the royal guards changing shifts. And deep down, she began to feel the tremors of something coming, like a storm in the distance, though the skies were clear. That's when the whispers began, about a nation of slaves, a people who had no king but claimed to serve a living God, one who had split the Red Sea, brought down Egypt, and was now moving toward Canaan. Israel. The name struck something in her. She'd heard stories from drunken travelers, stories that couldn't be explained, cities being destroyed without a sword, enemies fleeing before the battle even began. And then, the news came: 2 Israelite spies had entered Jericho. Rahab had never seen them, not yet, but somehow that night she didn't sleep. She lit a candle and stared at the flame for hours, her thoughts racing. She could hear the drums from the temple of Baal, but her spirit was elsewhere. For the first time in years, she prayed, not to Ashtoreth or Dagon, but into the air, hoping someone, anyone real, was listening. I don't know your name, she whispered, but if you're the God they speak of, come find me. The next morning, Rahab did what she always did. She opened her home to strangers. But as the sun reached its peak, something strange occurred. 2 men entered, cloaked, careful, clearly foreign. They didn't speak much, but their eyes moved like trained warriors. She knew instantly. These were the spies. But instead of raising an alarm, Rahab said nothing. Her heart pounded like war drums. She served them water, bread. She watched, and for the first time in her life, she felt fear. Not of them, but of what this moment meant. Was this divine? As the spies settled in, Rahab noticed a sealed letter left by one of her wealthy clients, a Canaanite official who had left in a hurry the day before. Curiosity took hold. She opened it carefully and read the contents. Inside was a report to the king of Jericho, describing a woman living in the wall who may be sympathetic to Israel. Her name, Rahab. She froze. They were already watching her. Somehow, they already suspected her shift in loyalty before she even made it. That's when the knock came at the door. Guards. Voices demanding she open up. Rahab had to choose. Not tomorrow. Not after reflection. Now, would she betray the spies? Or betray her city? Would she trust what little she'd heard of Israel's God? Or return to the gods of lust and blood? She turned to the 2 men, who had risen in panic. She whispered the impossible. Follow me now. What kind of woman hides enemies of the crown? a woman who fears a greater king. The sun had barely tilted west when chaos rippled through Jericho like a dropped stone in still water. It started in the palace. A runner bursting through the courtyard, breathless, whispering into the king's ear. Moments later, the alarm bells rang. The city gates began to close. A name was spoken. Not just any name. Rahab. The very walls that protected her from the outside world were now closing in on her from within. In her house, a structure wedged tightly into the very skin of Jericho's wall, Rahab stood in eerie stillness, her back pressed against the cold stone. Just above her, hidden beneath rows of drying flax stalks, were 2 Israelite spies, sent by Joshua to scout the land. Their mission: observe Jericho's strength, its weaknesses, and report back. What they hadn't planned on was being betrayed by time. But Rahab had already made a silent covenant. Not yet in blood, not yet in word, but in action. The night before, when she took them in, she hadn't asked their names. That was common practice in her line of work. But this time it wasn't out of professionalism, it was protection. The less she knew, the less she could be tortured into confessing. Yet deep within her, she didn't feel fear. She felt alignment, like the God of Israel had stepped into her story, and the moment had chosen her. And now that choice was about to be tested. The pounding on her door shook the air around her. "Bring out the men who came to you, those who entered your house tonight," the soldier roared. "They've come to spy on the land." Her fingers trembled, not from guilt, but from the realization that she had already crossed a line she could never return from. She glanced toward the staircase. Up there, beneath heaps of flax on her roof, 2 strangers lay completely still. Strangers whose God had cracked Egypt, split seas, and rained fire on armies. Could she really hide them from Jericho's wrath? Could she really lie for them? Could she really risk her life for a God she had never seen? But Rahab knew something the soldiers didn't. This wasn't just about 2 spies. It was about sides, and she had chosen hers. Without hesitation, she flung open the door. Her expression was calm, rehearsed. "Yes, 2 men came to me earlier," she said, keeping her voice smooth. "But I didn't know where they were from. They left at dusk before the city gate closed." She leaned forward, urgency in her eyes. "If you hurry, you can catch them." They went toward the Jordan Road. "Run fast, they haven't gotten far." The soldiers looked at her, suspicious. But she was Rahab, the innkeeper, the woman who had seen too much and said too little. The city never feared her, and that underestimation became her weapon. Within minutes, the king's men were galloping toward the river, torches raised high, searching for shadows that had never passed. Inside, the door closed with a heavy thud. Rahab stood alone again, alone yet not. She climbed the stairs slowly, step by step, until she reached the roof. The spies hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. But when she gently peeled back the flax, their eyes met hers wide with surprise, awe, and trust. "You're safe," she said softly. "For now." But this wasn't just courage, this was war. Because Rahab knew what she had done. Harboring enemies of the state was no small act. It was treason. It was death, a public one. Not just for her, but possibly for her entire family. The Canaanite kings didn't ask questions after betrayal. They made examples. But something far more terrifying than Canaan's law had gripped Rahab. It was the fear of a true God. She didn't know his name yet. She hadn't read his commandments. She had never stepped foot among his people. But deep within her spirit, she believed he was real, and he was coming. Let's pause here for a moment. There are decisions in life that mark your name in history. This was one of them. A prostitute by title, by reputation, by trade, had risked her life for a divine cause she barely understood. She had no guarantee of reward, no promise of mercy, just faith, raw, unshaped, unrefined but real. While the soldiers rode in the wrong direction, the spies lay hidden under her roof, not because of strategy, but because of one woman's fear of God over fear of man. In the streets below, rumors spread like fire. Some claimed the spies had shapeshifted and escaped in the form of shadows. Others believed a traitor had helped them vanish. Few dared to suspect Rahab, but a few is all it takes. The danger wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. And while the rest of Jericho prepared for the next sacrifice, for the next drunken feast, for the next night of worship to dead gods, Rahab prepared for something greater. A conversation, a deal, a cry for salvation, because what she did next would not just save 2 men. It would alter her bloodline forever. I have heard of your God, and I believe. The roof was cold that night. The flax stalks, though piled thick, couldn't drown out the stillness that had fallen over Rahab's house like a veil. Down below, Jericho hummed with drunken singing and the burning of incense. But above, under the open sky, 3 souls stood in the silence of something holy. Rahab's hands trembled slightly, not from fear now but from something far more profound. Something she couldn't explain, but could no longer silence. The 2 spies watched her, confused at first. She wasn't running. She wasn't demanding silver for her betrayal. She wasn't hiding her face or asking when they'd leave. Instead, she looked up at the stars. And she spoke. I know who you are. Rahab began, her voice soft but steady. Not by name, but by origin. You are Hebrews, and you serve the God. The spies exchanged a glance, but she didn't pause. I've heard the stories, she continued, her eyes never leaving the heavens, of how your God split the Red Sea, how Pharaoh's chariots drowned in waters that obeyed your Lord's voice, of how you crushed Sihon and Og, kings no one thought could fall. I've heard how your people wander, not because you're lost, but because your God leads you. And then she turned, slowly, like someone carrying the weight of revelation. Everyone in Jericho is terrified. You think these walls make us fearless? No. Our hearts melt like wax inside our chests. The soldiers talk boldly, but their eyes betray them. Even our gods are silent. She stepped closer to them, into the pale moonlight. But I believe, not in Baal, not in Dagon, not in Ashtoreth. They have eyes, but do not see. They have mouths, but cannot speak. But your God, He is alive. Then she said it, the words that cracked the heavens open. The Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on the earth below. That declaration didn't come from a priest, not from a prophet, not from a Levite. It came from a woman in a harlot's house, a woman who had been used, mocked, passed over, forgotten. And yet she saw God before others did. Her voice shook now, but it wasn't weakness, it was worship. And in that trembling, Rahab did something no one had ever done before in Jericho. She bowed her heart to a God she had never seen, and pledged her life to Him before she even knew what He demanded. Then her eyes filled with tears. Please, she whispered, I've shown kindness to you. Don't repay me with silence. When your people come, and I know you will, swear to me by your God that you'll spare me. She choked on the next words. Not just me, but my family, my mother, my father, my brothers and sisters, all who belong to them. Promise me you won't forget us. This wasn't just a request. It was desperation wrapped in faith. For the first time, Rahab had hope. But it wasn't just for herself. It was for the family who might never believe like she did, but whom she still loved. She stood, awaiting judgment. Would these men see her past? Would they doubt her change? Would they leave and never return? But the spies didn't hesitate. One of them reached into his cloak and pulled out a long, deep red cord, the color of blood, the color of mercy. Tie this scarlet cord in your window, he said. When we return, and we will, it will be the sign. You and everyone inside this house will be spared. It wasn't the kind of deal the world was used to. There was no silver exchanged, no bribes, no written contracts, just a scarlet cord and faith. Rahab took it gently, her hands shaking again. Not from fear but from awe. She had no sword, no shield, no army, just belief, just obedience, just a piece of red rope that now carried the weight of salvation. They gave her more instructions. Keep this a secret, the other spy said. Tell no one, not your friends, not your neighbors. If any of your family steps outside this house when we come, Their blood will be on them, not on us. She nodded. I understand. And somehow she did. She understood more in that moment than scholars in temples. More than soldiers in armor. She understood that faith was not a matter of position. It was a matter of surrender. And as the moon climbed higher, something eternal happened. Rahab, the harlot, the outsider, the used and discarded, was no longer merely a woman of the wall. She was a vessel of faith, a protector of destiny, a future link in a chain that would one day lead to the Messiah himself. But she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that she had staked everything on a scarlet cord, and she would not let go. When all falls, faith still stands. The earth had never trembled like this. Dust rose like smoke across Jericho. Screams filled the air. Horns loud, haunting, ancient, blasted from beyond the city walls. The sound didn't come from men, but from purpose. 7 rams' horns blown in holy rhythm, circling Jericho for the 7th time on the 7th day. Then, silence, and suddenly, collapse. Not from catapults, not from ladders, not from swords. The walls of Jericho, once the pride of Canaan, thick enough to race chariots upon, crumbled at the voice of obedience. Every brick, every stone, every symbol of strength became dust. But not all the wall fell. There was a section, seemingly insignificant, wedged on the city's outer edge, that remained standing. It wasn't because of its structure. It stood because of a scarlet cord hanging from the window. And inside that fragile house, Rahab clutched her family close. Her father wept silently in the corner. Her mother trembled. Her brothers stood ready to run. But there was nowhere left to go. Everything shook, yet their house held. It made no sense to them, but it made perfect sense to her. Rahab said nothing. She had said it all the night she tied that cord. She had declared her faith before the collapse. Now she was simply waiting for rescue. And then she heard them. Footsteps. Not chaos. Not looters. Not soldiers with fire. But 2 sets of feet, deliberate, familiar. The ones who had once laid hidden under her flax. The ones who had made a vow. The spies. Rahab! One of them shouted through the rubble. Stay where you are. We're coming. And like fire parting water, the soldiers of Israel cleared a path through the wreckage. They didn't just come to destroy. They came to redeem. The 2 spies entered her broken threshold and saw what no one else saw. A woman rescued by faith. She had no sword, no status, no army. But she had a promise, and now it had arrived. Gather everyone. One of them told her. No one gets left behind. She pulled her family close. Her mother, her father, her brothers, her younger sister who used to cry at night when the city's sacrifices burned too close. Her cousins. They all stepped forward into the arms of warriors who once hid beneath her roof. The same city that once looked down on her. The same walls that echoed with gossip about her profession, now witnessed her walk out untouched, while everything else burned. Outside, Israel had unleashed God's justice. The walls had fallen. The gates were fire. The idols of Baal lay broken at the feet of warriors who worshipped none but Yahweh. And yet, in the middle of this inferno, God had kept a promise. To a woman, to a harlot, to a believer. They brought Rahab and her family far beyond the smoke. The air smelled like ash and glory. Behind them, Jericho, the invincible fortress, now lay as dust beneath Israel's feet. But Rahab didn't look back. She had nothing behind her. Her past was in ruins. Her future was just beginning. They led her to the edge of the Israelite camp. Some stared. Some whispered. After all, she was a Canaanite, an outsider. A woman from the wall. But Joshua, the general, the leader of a nation, didn't see her that way. He saw faith. He saw the hand of God upon a woman no one else valued. Let her dwell among us, Joshua declared. She is not our enemy. She is our testimony. And with that single sentence, Rahab's identity changed. She was no longer Rahab the harlot. She was Rahab the saved. Rahab the believer. Rahab, daughter of Israel by faith. Her house didn't survive because of its location. It didn't stand because of luck. It stood because God honors those who believe in him even before they understand him. The woman who once sold her body for survival was now being given a place among God's people, not as a charity case, but as a woman of courage. And though she didn't know it yet, one day she would marry. One day, she would become the mother of a man named Boaz, a man who would marry a foreigner named Ruth. And through that lineage would come David, and eventually Jesus. But that's for another day. For now, Rahab stands at the edge of Jericho, watching the smoke rise, holding the scarlet cord in her hand, the same one that marked her house, her faith, and her covenant. And somewhere in heaven, God smiled, because when others saw a harlot, he had always seen a heroine. Most people's stories end when they're rescued. But Rahab's? That's when hers truly began. She had walked out of Jericho with no possessions, no home, no social status, no guarantee of acceptance. All she carried was her faith and her family, and that was more than enough for God to build a future that would outlive empires. As smoke from Jericho faded behind her, the Israelite camp became her new world. She was a stranger among God's chosen, a former harlot in a nation known for strict holiness. Eyes followed her. Whispers followed her name. Some still saw her as Rahab the Canaanite. But God had written a different name over her story, Rahab, daughter of faith. And while many in Israel came from bloodlines of prophets and patriarchs, she came from faith and obedience. And heaven had a plan for that. The Bible doesn't give us every detail of her early days in Israel, but it gives us something far more powerful, her legacy. Because sometime after her rescue, Rahab met a man. His name was Salmon, a noble of Judah, a man of royal blood, descended from the tribe that would one day bring kings. What did he see in her? The world saw a past. Salmon saw a miracle, a woman who believed in the God of Israel before she ever walked with his people. And out of that union between the once-lost woman of Jericho and the prince of Judah came a child, a son named Boaz. Now pause. Boaz wasn't just any man. He would grow to be kind, gentle, righteous, and radically welcoming to outsiders. It's no accident. Boaz had heard the story of his mother's faith. He knew the shame she once carried, and the glory God gave her instead. So when a Moabite widow named Ruth showed up years later, rejected and foreign, Boaz didn't flinch. He welcomed her, married her, and became part of another redemption story. Why? Because his mother, Rahab, had paved the way. Let's go deeper. Rahab wasn't just accepted into Israel. She was woven into the very bloodline of the Messiah. You'll find her name in the first chapter of the New Testament, Matthew 1 verse 5, in the direct genealogy of Jesus Christ. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab, a former harlot of a doomed city, became the great-great-grandmother of King David. A Canaanite woman, once marked for death, became part of God's plan to bring forth the Savior of the world. Only God writes stories like that, and the legacy doesn't stop there. In Hebrews 11 verse 31, the great hall of faith, where spiritual giants like Abraham, Moses, and Noah are celebrated, there she is. By faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe. She's the only woman besides Sarah named in that list. She didn't get there by lineage. She didn't get there by being perfect. She got there because she believed when others mocked, and acted when others stayed silent. But God wasn't done praising her. In James 2 verse 25, the Bible returns to her name again, this time as an example of living faith in action. Was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? Think about that. The Bible could have picked anyone to make the case for faith and action, but it chose Rahab. Not Moses, not Elijah, not even Mary. Rahab, because while many talked about God, she risked everything to honor him. She didn't know Hebrew law. She hadn't grown up hearing Yahweh's name. She had no Torah scrolls, no temple training. But when the moment came, she obeyed. That's why 3 books of the Bible, Matthew, Hebrews, and James, mention her by name. And here's the most powerful part. God didn't erase Rahab's past. He included it. Even the New Testament still calls her Rahab the harlot. Why? Because heaven isn't ashamed of what you used to be when what you've become glorifies him. She was a testimony, not just a trophy. Her story now screams through generations. You're not too far gone. You're not disqualified. Faith can rewrite everything. So, my G, understand this. Rahab's name is not just written in Israel's history. It's written in eternity. Her courage changed her family. Her obedience saved a bloodline. Her faith unlocked royalty. And one day, in the future centuries after walls fell and wars ended, a child would be born in Bethlehem. They would call him Jesus,